It's Street Talk, conversations with state and community leaders about the latest news on transportation, regional planning, and transit for Middle Tennessee.
But things do wear out over time, and I think today people look at I-440 and say, you know, TDOT did a pretty good job there.
Hi, my name is Tanisha Hall, host for today's Street Talk. Here with my co-host Stanton Higgs from TMA Group, and that was Paul Degges, TDOT Deputy Commissioner. Paul oversees the design and implementation of the department's engineering projects. Paul has overseen the awarding of more than 6,200 contracts with a construction value of more than $13 billion. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Tanisha. I appreciate being here today.
Great, great. So Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your career, and some of the changes that you've seen over at TDOT over the years.
I actually worked for a contractor for a little while I was still in college, and graduated from Tennessee Tech, came to work for the department. Worked in several different areas in the department, started in field construction. The first project I worked on was widening I-40 out by the airport and Pressure Priest Dam here in Nashville. Also did a little intersection job at Mount Juliet Road and Lebanon Road. It's been rebuilt since then. That makes you feel kind of old when projects you worked on get rebuilt, but that's the nature of a growing and vibrant community like we have here in Middle Tennessee. But after working in field construction, I came and did a little bit of a tour through several different areas of the department and design. Did a little bit of work in when microcomputers started coming into vogue. I was pretty proficient with computer work, and I converted a lot of Fortran 4 mainframe software to Fortran 77.
Were you using those punch cards and everything too?
Well, yes, I started using punch cards, and the first computer I worked on was an IBM 1130. So, but we at TDOT, we used to use the punch cards when you would do design work. You would load a deck and you would drop it off late in the afternoon, and hopefully in the next morning you didn't find that you had a coding error. But a lot of the work I did was converting that Fortran 4 mainframe software that was designed for the punch card type inputs to Fortran 77. And of course, moved on into the structures division, and that's where I kind of spent, I guess the formative part of my career was in our structures division, where I was in the hydraulic design and permitting section. So did design work on the large box culverts up to bridges over the Tennessee River, and also did a lot of the permitting work. So a lot of people wonder, well, why would the structures division be getting permits? And the original permits that TDOT had to get were from the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899, and it was about putting bridges over navigable streams. So over the years, the Clean Water Act and everything getting passed, the Structures Division kept that role. We've since moved on to our Environmental Division and put them there. It's certainly appropriate there, but that's how I kind of got started. And after doing a lot of the work in structures for 8 or 9 years, I ended up kind of being more of a generalist. Worked in our headquarters construction division for a while, went out to our Region 3 operations and was the assistant director and then director at our Region 3 facility. Came up to headquarters, was an assistant to the chief engineer for a short time, and then had an opportunity and was offered the chief engineer's role. So I've been in that role since 2004, so time kind of marches on. I still feel like I'm about 30, but obviously I'm not anymore.
Paul, you are pretty active in discussions about national policy. I know you work a lot around the state trying to help make sure that Tennessee is represented in a lot of the issues that are going on nationally. And a lot of people look to Tennessee to kind of see how they should be moving forward with transportation issues. Can you talk a little bit about how we, with different administrations, they want to have their own set of policies going on. Can you talk a little bit about how Tennessee is kind of playing a part in that, and how we're making sure that we can also take advantage of some of those policy changes?
Sure. So, one of the things that's critical for us to be able to do is to have credibility with our customers, credibility with our elected officials. And so I think it's important that we be very steady in how we speak to communities and our customers across the state, and to be very truthful in what we do and talk to people about what we're doing and why we're trying to do things. Working with Congress and the State General Assembly as well is important, because they need to understand the things that our customers are telling us. And so, for a long time, a lot of people would come to us and say, we want more transportation stuff. We want more roads, sidewalks, transit, all of these different types of transportation products and services are needs that people have out there. And of course, one of the things that our parents have always taught us is about, well, what's the difference between a need and a want? And we've got to be honest with people sometimes and say, that's probably more of a want. If money grew on trees, we'd build that road. We'd make that rail investment perhaps. But money doesn't grow on trees, and so we have to look at those things. A few years ago, we had been through the Great Recession, and there was a lot of discussion across the country about transportation. And one of the things Congress kept telling us was, but there's all of this money out there, y'all need to be spending it. And so one of the things that we did is we worked with our congressional delegation here in Tennessee, and we looked at unspent earmarks. And so, earmarking, it was a long tradition of picking pet projects and put money to them. And in 2009, that kind of stopped. But there was all of this money built up in earmarks. It was actually nationwide about $2.2 billion in earmarks. And I had Tennessee's list, and it was, in the millions, over $100 million, to be honest. And we started looking at those earmarks. Some of them were active, but some of them were just dead as a hammer. And we got with our congressional delegation and Congressman Fleischman down in Chattanooga, got interested, and he worked, I think, in a bipartisan manner in Washington, and they passed legislation that allowed us to repurpose $2.2 billion worth of earmarks nationwide. In Tennessee, we were able to repurpose about $100 million in earmarks. We had to repurpose them within 50 miles of where they were originally proposed, but a lot of them were what we call token earmarks. It would be, $1 million is a lot of money, but if you have to bring $99 million to the table to spend it, it probably ain't going to happen. That's like getting a coupon for 1% off for something you really don't want, So that's kind of an example of working with Congress. We do the same thing with the Tennessee General Assembly. Today, we're trying to work with Congress on an issue having to do with at-grade railroad crossings on rural, or non-state highways. TDOT's going to fix the railroad crossings on state highways, but a real small community that's trying to figure out how to, pay for school buses to get kids to school really doesn't have the money to bring, $500,000 to the table for, to put gate signals and all at an at-grade railroad crossing.
We have 3 different interstates that basically intersect in downtown Nashville. So I've thought about that because I hear it a lot over the years in businesses I've been into. Do you see that as a tremendous blessing or just an unbelievable challenge to have all that traffic and all this interstates intersecting right in the downtown area?
Well, I mean, I think that we have to look at it and say that that is a huge opportunity for the people of Middle Tennessee. You know, we're within a day's drive of nearly 2/3 of the population of the United States, very centrally located, and our access to the economic markets across the country is what allows us to be relatively successful on an economic standpoint. So, you know, we have, 6 interstate legs coming into Nashville, but if you think about Tennessee as a whole, you know, Knoxville has I-75, I-40, and one leg of I-81. Memphis has I-55, I-40. We have I-69 underway, and then there's I-22 coming out of Birmingham that stops just outside of Memphis. 7 interstate legs in Memphis. Memphis being one of the major freight hubs of continental United States. So I think that it's a huge opportunity for us, and that puts a lot of responsibility on the transportation providers in Middle Tennessee to be able to look at this this huge opportunity for us and to be able to manage those networks in a 21st century perspective.
So I know TDOT, you deal with lots of different things, cars and freight and bridges over rivers and things like that. But for people, for common people, to kind of understand, what do you think is the largest or the biggest challenge that we have to increase mobility in general for people, and what role can TDOT play in that?
Well, I think you have to look at balance. I think balance is a critical issue, right, for all of us. And so, you know, the average person in Middle Tennessee doesn't really know who owns what road. All they know is that they want to go from point A to point B with the least amount of frustration that they can have. They want good quality infrastructure, whether that's a road, a sidewalk, or the use of transit. And they want it to be efficient for them. And so I think that it's critical for all of the providers of these transportation services to really work together to be able to try to have a seamless transportation network. I do think that people need to acknowledge that there are trade-offs. Today we have a lot of areas in the Middle Tennessee community that are really, really growing fast. If you look over on in the downtown area, look at all of the residential housing that's going in high-rise fashion. I mean, that's a huge impact on the transportation network. Lots of desires for much more pedestrian infrastructure. I think that most people would acknowledge right now that the increase in pedestrian fatalities across the state, across the country, shows that there's probably an underinvestment in pedestrian infrastructure out there. So I think that's something that we've got to look at, but you also have to think about that there are trade-offs. So if you widen, if you have buildings light up against the right-of-way, you're probably not going to bulldoze the buildings. And so when you start widening pedestrian infrastructure, a lot of times you're going to do that at the expense of what transit uses, what automobiles use, and even what bicycles are using. So that balance in there, I think, is one of the things that is one of the biggest struggles that collectively as transportation agencies that we all have to work together to try to find that right solution. Because we want everybody to be winners, but the reality is that you're going to have to do some analysis to see, well, what is the best solution of a particular corridor.
So Paul, you mentioned some of the struggles that we have with the transportation system. For a long time, one of the struggles, and still continues to be a struggle, is sustainable long-term transportation funding. So I know when we worked together at the state, when I worked, I should say, with TDOT, We worked to pass the Improve Act to help people understand what the transportation funding was for and why it was needed. And I know that still isn't enough for all of the transportation needs that are currently there now. But can you talk a little bit about how some of the great things that have happened since the Improve Act was passed? And also, the regions is still facing a huge issue with transportation funding. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe we can pull together as a region to try to figure out how we can solve this funding issue?
Sure. So the Improve Act was a piece of legislation that most people will attribute it to a 6-cent increase in the gas tax, 10 cents on diesel, a list of 962 highway projects. But it actually did a whole lot more than that. It was actually a tax cut if you looked at it in aggregate. There's a tax cut on food and a few other items, so some business taxes. But from the transportation side of it, it was really a pretty transformative piece of legislation. So before I get to the 962 line item projects that we talked about, let's talk about what else was in the bill. So it spoke to us prioritizing maintaining a good state of repair on the existing highway system. It provides dollars to city and county governments. It was an increase proportional to what TDOT got. So I think that's one of the key issues is there needed to be equity when that legislation was passed. It wasn't just about giving TDOT money. It really tried to look broadly across the spectrum. And so city and counties, TDOT, and even within TDOT, we did an analysis on the discretionary spending that the department has. Certainly we own the state highway network, but we also provide money to transit. So the Improve Act transit dollars were used to leverage federal grant programs. And so we actually extended the reach of the Improve Act by drawing down additional federal dollars. We did move into the program. Again, as I mentioned, the customers really don't know who owns what. So of the 962 projects, over 500 of those projects were bridge replacement projects on city and county roads. And so I think that alone allowed us to really reach out and touch every single county in the state of Tennessee with projects. You know, up on the Cumberland Plateau, there's not as much water up there, not quite as many bridges, but we still had other projects up there. So in the Middle Tennessee area, certainly, you know, the Clarksville Pike project that's under construction today as we speak is an important project. You know, the I-440, I think everybody knows that I-440 was probably the centerpiece of the Improve Act legislation in that it was a road that was end of its useful life. I think I spoke earlier about working on those sound walls. So when I was in college, I was helping to build I-440, and I guess it's a reminder of I'm not a spring chicken anymore, but things do wear out over time. And I think today people look at I-440 and say, you know, TDOT did a pretty good job there. We were able to upgrade the facility, you know, put a little bit extra capacity out there, you know, did a little bit of work on some of the noise walls that were through there and address some of the lighting issues on the road. So again, lots of good projects, and I think the Improve Act, you know, we track the progress of that. We've got about half of the projects underway right now, but we're making good progress in getting the projects out the door and also looking at the core tenets of the Improve Act of not just 962 projects, but looking at modal needs, looking at state of good repair of the existing highway network.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Paul.
Sure, enjoyed it. Good seeing you guys. I'm sure we'll see you around.
It's Street Talk. Conversations with state and community leaders about the latest news on transportation, regional planning, and transit for Middle Tennessee.